It's natural that the Hijri date won't be second nature like the American date, or the Gregorian rather, because we don't use it in our bank accounts, in our documents or anything. But at the same time, you should have an awareness of the Hijri date. You shouldn't just lock in when Ramadan comes or Eid. You should be aware of it all year round for several reasons. One of them is, most basic of them, is your zakah. You pay zakah once a year, right? When is that once a year? You choose it, right? You choose the zakah date, but it has to be according to the Hijri date. You cannot choose January 1st. I give my zakah on January 1st because the Hijri year will pass before the Gregorian. So zakah is owed and you're still waiting for January 1st because you set it on the wrong calendar. So you set it Muharram 1st. Now every time Muharram 1st comes, you check your finances and you do the math for zakah. So that's an obligation on every Muslim who has a zakatable amount of money. Is zakatable a word? Should be. If you have the wealth that is owed zakah on, and a year passes on and you don't pay that zakah, you're committing a major sin, right? It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So that's one basic thing that you should know the Hijri calendar for. Another of them is Ramadan, right? That's an obvious one. When's Ramadan coming? You got to make up fasts, Eids, the Hajj season. So there's acts of worship. There's special merits of parts of months, right? Like in Muharram, we have a special merits in Sha'ban. So all this will pass you by and you're unaware. You're disconnected. Year in, year out, 1446, 1445, 1450, and you're just completely unaware. What are we counting from? 1446, 1,446 years since what? Since the Hijrah, right? Since the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina. This is what our calendar commemorates. And the calendar was instituted under the rule of Umar ibn Khattab. So the Prophet ﷺ dies when? The 11th year of the Hijrah, the beginning of the 11th year. So that means 10 years in Medina, because the 11th year starts and he dies in the 3rd month, Rabi' al-Awwal, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So that means 10 years in Medina. How long was your Prophet before that in Mecca? 13 years, so 23 years of total prophethood. He dies, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Abu Bakr becomes the Khalifa for a couple of years. He dies, then Umar becomes the Khalifa. And now Umar is in charge and the Ummah is proliferating and growing. In fact, it's under his rule, in his 10 or 12-year rule, where the Ummah becomes the largest continuous land empire on the face of the earth. This is all less than 30 years after the Prophet ﷺ came with Iqra, I'm a prophet. Now it's the largest empire on the face of the earth. And in this time, as the empire is growing, as the constituents are increasing in number, as the registrations and the census and the zakah and all these things need to be figured out, Umar radiallahu anhu, he gets the Sahaba together and he says, we got to do all this administration and all these things that we never had before. We need to take dates. We need to write things down. We need to have a census. We need to have papers, right? This is how empires work. This is how governments are. It was something that was completely foreign to the Arabs because they never needed it and they never had any such government or continuous civilization before Islam at all. So they have a council. And he gathers the Sahaba, the most senior Sahaba, and he says, what should we do? So some of them said, let's take some of the existing calendars. There's Jews, there's Christians, there's the Roman Empire, there's the Persian Empire. Pick up one of their calendars and just use it. These are the dates that we use. And he rejected that. So some of them said, we'll make our own calendar. He said, let's do that. When should we start it? So some of them said from the beginning of Revelation. If it was beginning of Revelation, what year would it be? Which is 14. It's addition, guys. I mean, come on. If it was like calculus, I'd give you a break, but no, 13 years, 1446, it'd be 1459. I know it's a weekend, guys, but come on. It'd be 1459, right? 13 years before the Hijrah. You had the number right. So they suggested it's from Revelation. Some suggested it should be from his birth. Some suggested it would be from his death, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Umar rejected all these ideas until someone suggested it should be from the Hijrah. So he took that idea. And they asked him why. What's so special about the Hijrah that you made it the calendar? And he said this was the first time that the Muslim Ummah went from a persecuted minority to a state. He wasn't sahir, kadhab, a liar, a magician that's causing a ruckus in Mecca. He's the leader of a city now. the undisputed prophetic, spiritual, economic, political leader. And that changed everything. We went from people who would be afraid to pray in public to building a masjid, and that being the downtown center of our city. From hiding your faith and being afraid to proclaim Islam to proudly wearing it, proudly adhering to it, and implementing it the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended, from a place of strength. He said that era was so significant, that event was so significant, that we need to commemorate it every single year. Not only that, but because of the stories that happened that exemplified the sacrifice, the devotion, the perseverance, and the sincerity that is necessary for every Muslim to follow these people's footsteps, as we know we must. These Sahaba, these forerunners in faith, there are examples, right? We hear Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali and Fatima and Aisha and Khadija radiallahu anhum ajma'in. We hear these names and constantly stories of their prayer and their perseverance and their fasting, and we're told, be like that. We all have their names for the most part. We're all named after them, and we name our kids after them. So he wanted us to remember their stories, like his story, for example, his own story. That in the Hijrah now, as they're running for their lives, not for their lives actually, for something more important than their lives. Because they would happily sacrifice their lives for the sake of this deen. They didn't run for their lives. They ran for something so much greater. And the story of Umar tells us that during the Hijrah. He says, I agreed to make Hijrah with 2 of my boys. We'll make Hijrah together. It's easy to travel through the desert together as opposed to alone. So we'll meet outside of the city. And whoever makes it there, we'll wait a little bit and we'll go. Whoever doesn't make it, we're still going. There's no option. We must join Rasulullah ﷺ in Medina and continue this journey from there. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. Allah said so. It's that simple. It was that simple for them. And because Quraysh was so adamant about putting out this light of faith, they would literally tie up some of their family members at home, imprison them if they knew they were going to try to go to Medina. They would take away 100% of their wealth or property. That still didn't stop them. Some of them woke up and their family said, your animals, your gold, your silver, your food, your property, your business, none of it you have access to. They went to Medina walking. You can't stop us. When Umar was supposed to meet with his friends, the deal was like, we meet and we go. And if anyone doesn't make it, we're still going. 2 out of 3 make it. The 3rd one gets prevented. Later on their journey, as they're going, someone catches up and says, hey, you, to the 2nd guy that's with Umar, I don't recall his name. Your mother sent me to get you. She said she will not eat. She will not comb her hair. She will not take care of herself until you come home. She just has to speak to you. It's super important. The guy's like torn. Now it's my mother. She's made an oath that she's going to die if I don't go home, literally. Some of them made oaths like this, and it wasn't a saying. They had literally starved themselves until someone answered. So it's something people did for some reason. Umar says, this is a trap. This is Abu Jahl is coming to call you because your mother wants you when you're making hijrah. Don't go. Doesn't matter. There's something greater, as much as that may hurt, as much as it may be difficult to do, there's something greater than what your mother needs right now, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, I can't, it's my mother. So he says, fine, take my horse, take my camel. It's faster. So that way, if you get a bad feeling, just dip, come back. So he takes his camel, and as they advance, the person he's with, I don't recall if it was Abu Jahl or who it was, tells him, I need to do something, or he figures out a ruse to get him to get his camel down. Then they capture him, they take him home, and the whole point of why they were leaving happens, which they tie him, they torture him until he renounces his faith. That's why they were leaving, because there's something greater at risk than their physical body, and that was their faith. And they couldn't stay home in the comfort of their family and their wealth, knowing that they may lose their faith one day. The trial may continue to that point. Besides the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had commanded it. So this is what they went through. People would wake up and a home would just be empty. There's people gone. Where'd they go? They went to Medina. They ran in the middle of the night with whatever they could carry on one animal, as we'll see in the other stories we'll get to. But my story here that I want to talk about is none of this actually. This was just kind of a tangent. It's the story of Umar himself. So I'll mention 3 or 4 stories of the Hijrah with 3 or 4 specific, one specific reflection for each of them, particular to do with our times as Muslims. Because again, Umar, and first and foremost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended for this to be our calendar, so that every single year we can commemorate these stories and these lessons. And the most pertinent of these stories, as I'm mentioning, the first of them is the story of Umar. Is that when he comes to make hijrah now, the context is everything you just heard. People running for their lives. People afraid to give the sense that they may go to Medina because their family might tie them up at home. People disappearing in the middle of the night. He wakes up now and he puts on all of his equipment. And he puts on his quiver and he holds his bow and he carries his sword. And he brings his animal laden with equipment, meaning I'm traveling. And he brings it to the downtown of Mecca. Where's the downtown? The city center is what? Till today. It's the Kaaba. And he makes tawaf. How long does it make tawaf? How long does it take to make tawaf? A little more. Probably around like 20, 30 minutes. If there's no one around you, 20 minutes I'd say is the fastest. So they see him going make tawaf with his weapons. His animal's right there. So it's a nice amount of time for everyone to see him. Then he goes to the VIP section. They had a little raised platform where the VIP of Quraysh would sit. The chieftains of the tribes, the most noble. You wouldn't even be allowed an audience if you're not part of the nobility or if they didn't allow you in. So he goes there and he tells them, لا يرغم الله إلا هذه المعاطس. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not rub any noses in the dust except yours. May no one get disgraced in life except you people. And then he tells them, من أراد أن ترمل زوجته أو ييتم ولده أو تثقله أمه فليتبعني وراء هذا الوادي. Whoever wants their wife to be a widow, or their kids to be orphans, or their mother to be bereaved of them, follow me to this valley. I'm making hijrah. I'm going to Medina. And I'll wait for you a little bit. I'm not going to go straight. And if anybody wants to meet me there, this will be the result. He waits. No one shows up, of course, because it's Umar. And he leaves. What's the point of this? In times of weakness, in times where Muslims seem to be scurrying about in fear, we need heroes. We need people who are going to stand up and say, I'm unapologetically Muslim. I will pray in public. I will wear my hijab. I will say free Palestine. There is no threat you can say or make or do that will break me. Because the heart that carries this faith is dispensable. The faith itself is not. But the physical structure that carries it, it's a small price to pay. I'm not afraid. I can say this to the highest level. I can say this with my imperfections. I can say this as I struggle to pray on time. Because my lineage and my legacy comes from Umar ibn Khattab. Because I remember during the hijrah, as everyone is afraid, as everyone is unsure, as people are wondering what to do next, as people are being tortured and tied up, he goes and he lets them know what this is all about. Don't think because you see this, because we look like this, because this is what you see happening, don't think we're afraid. Don't think we're confused. Don't think we're waiting to see how it all turns out like you. No, we know exactly where this is going. And it's not in your favor. It's in ours. For now, things look like this. We'll be patient. Some of us will be afraid. Some of us will break. Some people will cry. But there will always be people like Umar to stand up and say, no, 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 not me. And then there will be others that look at them and gain strength. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have in every single time period people like that. Should be me, should be you. To stand up because other Muslims are waiting, desperate. There's people who are watching Khabib fight McGregor and they're saying, if this turns out wrong, my faith is in jeopardy. If Khabib loses, I don't know what I'm going to do with my faith. Some people literally said that. They were not joking. They were grown men with families. So their faith is so fragile in times of weakness, they need to see you praying in public. They need to see you wearing your hijab. They need to see you turn down a haram offer and tell them, no, 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 Allah is greater than everything. Allahu Akbar. Because that will be the baton that you hand to pass to future generations that will look to your past and say, this is why we're Muslim. This is why we keep going. But they won't be able to do that if we don't give them those stories. The second story from the hijrah that I want us to think about is the story of Suhaib al-Rumi. Suhaib al-Rumi means Suhaib the Roman. He was from the northern Arab tribes. He was kidnapped as a child and sold into Roman territory. So he learns Latin and he grows up as a slave in Roman territory. And by the time he gets reintroduced to Arab lands, he's a grown man. So he learns Arabic as an adult and he speaks it with an accent. He finds his way as a slave back to Arab lands, even deeper now south. He gets into Mecca. He makes a deal with his master. All this is before Islam, and he purchases freedom, a very rare thing. Because when the master would hear that you wanted manumission, he would say, okay, the price is $1 billion. Good luck. That way you work your life off trying to pay it back and you never get there. So he's making even more money because you're trying to earn your freedom. Just like credit cards, right? It's not that different. So he earns his freedom and he becomes filthy rich. It's not just he earns his freedom, he becomes a rich businessman. Rags to riches, literally. And then he becomes Muslim. And he becomes persecuted. And then when the hijrah comes now, they follow him to the outskirts of the city. And they tell him, you came here with no money. You came here a no one. We made you. This city is the reason why you exist. Your freedom, your wealth. And now you think you could just leave? Are you out of your mind? He tells them, listen, you see my quiver is full of arrows. For every arrow will be one of you. I'm a good shot. And then when I'm out and you're in physical hand-to-hand distance, I'll pull out my sword. Is that the way you want this to end? They said, just give us your money. He said, if that's what you're after, there it is. It's over there. Here's where I buried it. I buried it in that area. Go take it, all of it. I don't care. He didn't tell them, hey guys, I worked hard for my freedom. Let's do 50-50. He didn't say the average price of slaves today is this, how I just buy myself again. He didn't do any offers. He didn't say, I worked hard my whole life. This is my blood, sweat, and tears. Let's talk about it. No, he said, that's what you're after? If I give it to you, will you leave me alone? Well, can I go live my life? Can I dedicate my soul to my Creator? They said, yes. He said, there it is. And he leaves. And as he's entering into Medina now, the Prophet ﷺ himself meets him at the outskirts and he tells him, رَبِحَ الْبَيْعَ يَا صُهَيْبِ. That was a profitable trade. You made a lot of money on that one. That trade was fully in the green. You made multiple times over what you spent and the effort you put in. If you could only see it. It takes epic sacrifice in times like this. Imagine someone working their whole lives, your goal, where are you at now, at your age, everything you've built up to this moment. And someone says, hand that over, everything, start from scratch. That's the cost of holding on to your faith. For Suhaib, it was an instant. It wasn't hard to make that decision. He was shocked. That's what you want? Get lost. I'm on the road to something greater. I have a huge aspiration that extends far beyond that. And that's what you want? You're like chasing the crumbs? Take it. As long as I can have this faith. As long as you'll no longer stand in the way of me in this faith. That's what means the world to me. So, in times like this, we need Muslims to sacrifice. We need people who see everything they've pledged, everything they've devoted to something, and see that it clashes with the road to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then to say we don't need it. The future generation needs to hear that I could have been more well off. I could have had more to offer you in terms of worldly things. You could have dressed better. You could have eaten better. We could have lived in a better house. But I chose to earn halal. What do you think they're going to feel when they hear that? That I know you wanted more. I know we could have had more. I know people are more comfortable than us and having more fun than us. And I actively chose this because it was halal. Don't tell it to them when they're like 6 or 7. It's not going to work. They want the pool. They don't care. Save it till like they're 13 to 14. They're teenagers. Maybe you have siblings or offspring or nephews and nieces. Share with them a story like that. Let them know that this baton is being handed to you and that is not easy. But you have to live that life first. You got to have that story to hand it over. You can't make it up. It won't hit as hard when they hear it from Umar al-Khattab until they have that connection. But they have that connection with you. That's your job. That's my job. For our siblings, for our children, for anyone who we are able to have that influence with. How is Suhaib al-Rumi able to give it up in an instance? It's because he had lived that life up until that point, sacrificing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now it's even more grand. It's even more in number and quantity. But he's been doing it all along, sacrificing for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's just another sacrifice, even though it's so much more in number. We have the story of Abu Salama and his family. And Salama, his wife, is the one telling us the story. That when the Prophet ﷺ, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet ﷺ that Hijrah was commanded and all Muslims must go to Medina, Abu Salama came home one day and he gathered as much things as he could put onto one camel. Whatever fits on one animal, that's all we're taking, a family of 3. We don't have time to wait. We don't have time to ask people. They might tie us up. They might prevent us. They might force us to sacrifice our faith, and we can't have that. So she says, Abu Salama gathered everything he could put onto one camel. Then he picked me up and put me onto the camel and put Salama in my lap, our son. And he began to lead the camel outside of Mecca. They come to the first valley on the outskirts of Mecca, and all of a sudden her tribe, Banu Asad, begins to attack them. They tell them, you accepted this faith. They tell Abu Salama, you accepted this faith. You want to go get lost in another city, leave your family, that's your problem. This woman is ours. She belongs to our tribe. They beat him up and they take her and her son and they leave. He's alone, he has no choice, he continues on to Medina. On the way back now to Banu Asad's dwellings, his tribe attacks them. They say, you took your girl, your daughter, she belongs to your tribe, sure, but the boy, Salama, belongs to his father's tribe. You have no right to take him. They get in a fight, they take Salama. Abu Salama's where? Where's the father, Abu Salama? He's in Medina. Salama's with her tribe, and now Salama's with his tribe, a small child, all on his own, had no idea what's going on. And they keep them separate like this. A family, small child, mother and father separated. Everyone is somewhere. They have no means of communication, no idea if they're even alive or dead. To be reunited is the most simple thing. All you have to do is renounce this faith, and you'll be a happy family again. And Salama says, I would leave my home, my family's home every single day and go back to the valley where this happened and cry all day long until nightfall and go home and do the same thing the next day. This continued for 10 months until one random tribesman of a different tribe, not even a Muslim, saw her and he said, this makes no sense. I'm going to take you to Medina. And he reunited the family. But for 10 months they were told, all you have to do is renounce this faith, change your mind, come back home, come back to normal, and everything will be fine. The perseverance to be alone after being a family for the sake of this faith, that's something huge. That's something the future generation will need to hear when they carry the baton, when we give it to them in their hands. That I was patient through difficult situations, through loss. I was patient and persevered through temptations for you to have this faith today. They won't have stories that we're not living today. If we're not making those choices, if we're not living these decisions, they may not be as epic, they may not be as dramatic, that's fine. They don't need to be. They need to be your stories. They need to be stories of courage, the same thing. They need to be stories of perseverance and sacrifice. So that when you give that to the next generation, they use it as fuel. Because they're going to need it. The same way that you need it right now. Are these characteristics, these stories, are they not fuel that you desperately need right now? That is desperately needed every single day. Just scrolling through social media and wondering, are we on the right path? Are we doing the right thing? Is there hope? Are things going to get better? Stories of the Hijrah are ever more vital and ever more relevant. And it's not a coincidence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended through the actions of Umar and the Sahaba for us to commemorate this every single year. There's a great deal else that happened on the Hijrah. We have the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, Zainab herself. When she's going on the Hijrah, they accost her and they attack her and they cause her animal to rear up and she falls, miscarrying and killing the grandchild of Rasulullah ﷺ and preventing her from going to Medina for months as well. And she was the last of the Prophet ﷺ's family to remain in Mecca all by herself. You have the Hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ himself and the amount of steps that he took to ensure that he arrives to Medina secretly and safely. When he was a prophet, he could have simply raised his hand and said, oh Allah, teleport us there. Make us invisible. Bring back the Buraq. Where'd that thing go? You guys remember the Buraq, the flying animal, Isra al Mi'raj? Is it doing anything right now? Can it take us to Medina in a split second? Why didn't he do any of that? Instead, what did he do? He leaves that night. He has a decoy in his bed, right? Ali radiallahu anhu sleeps in his bed so they can see someone's there. He leaves in the opposite direction of Medina. Medina's north, he goes south. He stays in a cave for 3 days so they don't catch his trail. He has a guide to take them away from the main path to Medina, to take us from the coast. All these steps, He has people bringing them food. Asma, the daughter of Abu Bakr, was bringing them food. And Abdullah, the son of Abu Bakr, was bringing them news. And Amir and Fuhayra, the servant of Abu Bakr, was bringing a flock of sheep to walk over everyone's footsteps so they can't trace them. He's doing all these things when he could have just said, oh Allah, make us invisible. Teleport us to Medina. Allah has the ability and He has the right to ask that because He's a prophet. Me and you asking that would be weird because we don't have the ability to ask for miracles on demands, but prophets do. That's what makes them prophetic, right? The fact that they can make demands of miracles and perform them in front of the people to prove their prophethood in times of need, in times of challenge. But He does none of that. And the lesson there, as the scholars have said, is that He's teaching us the formula to get things done. Even when you are a prophet obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you use the means that you have in front of you. And when you exhausted all of the halal means and you're obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the only possible result is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be in your favor. Whatever He decrees will be in your favor, even if it's not exactly what you wanted. So after all of that, after leaving at night and leaving a decoy in his bed and staying in a cave for 3 days, going in the opposite direction, all these steps that he took to arrive to Medina secretly and safely, what happens? They end up at the mouth of the cave anyway, right? They follow them and they end up at the mouth of Ghar Thawr. And Abu Bakr says, O Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if one of them looks down, they will see us. Ghar Thawr is not an extensive cavern that goes to the back of the mountain. It's like a small crack in the wall. You could see the outside, you could see the inside from the outside. So he was terrified. He said, O Messenger of Allah, if one of them just looks down, we're done for. They're not here to talk to us. They're not here to arrest us. They're here to kill us. And he says, Ya Abu Bakr, ma dhannuka bithnain Allahu thalithuhuma. O Abu Bakr, what do you think of two? What is your perception, your conclusion of two, and Allah is their third? You see two people here, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. What do you think now? Your first point was, if one of them looks down, we're done for. Sure. My answer to that is we're not alone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. So that whole story teaches us that in any endeavor you have, worldly endeavor, school, work, marriage, a spiritual endeavor, I want to become more religious, I want to repent from this sin, I want to come closer to Allah, I want to change my life. Any type of goal, you exhaust the means. What are the means you have in front of you? You can ask somebody, you might have some family connection, you have your own physical strength, you have wealth. Exhaust the means. See where all of these means can take you while obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. Not engaging in any halal and any haram means, only halal means. And then secondly, having the complete faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has your back. That there's only 3 or 4 possibilities. One, what you want will come to fruition. You'll get that job, you'll get that spouse, you'll get exactly what you wanted. You won't marry your cousin with the big nose. Averted, success. Next is, if that doesn't happen, it's something better. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will decree something better for you than what you wanted. So what you wanted doesn't come to pass, you get something even better. The third option is what? If what I wanted doesn't come to pass and I don't get something better, what else could happen? The hereafter. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will save it for me in the hereafter. And as Ibn al-Qayyim says, and other scholars have said, rahmahullah, that when the servant comes to the day of judgment and sees the reward for the unanswered dua, that means unanswered in this dunya because it's still being answered in the hereafter, they will wish that no dua was answered in the hereafter. In the dunya, sorry. They'll wish that every time they raise their hands, Allah didn't give them, so that they can cash in on it in the hereafter. Because at the end of the day, whatever they made dua for here, wrapped up here. It's over. And now they'll see that the only thing remains is that. So that's 3. There's one more, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala averts an evil for you. That you were making dua for something that you wanted that would have been good, but instead an evil was supposed to happen. You were supposed to break your leg. You were supposed to do some other hardship, go through some other hardship. It cancels out. So if I do my part and I obey Allah and I trust in Him, it's only one of these outcomes. I will never falter. I'll never be afraid. The Prophet ﷺ said, we did what we could. We exhausted all the effort we had available to us, all the means. And we already mentioned some of the things, the majority of the things that he did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now that we're here in a cave, our back is to the wall, can we do anything more? That's it, Allah's with us. And He made a promise, and that promise is true. So even though we're here, we're in a cave, we have no equipment, we have no means of self-defense. They're on the outside, they're ready to kill us. There's 100 camel bounty on each of us. There's a fortune in this cave. There's no reason why we shouldn't be caught and killed. Except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the only reason that you need. And why is he so confident in that? Because he did his part. He said, there's literally nothing else that I could do. I exhausted all the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave me. And that's the formula for us likewise. Exhaust the means that you have available to you in every single situation, and then trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He'll bring about one of these results, and it will only be in your favor. There's a lot more that happened on the Hijrah. The Hijrah itself was a one-time event. The Prophet ﷺ famously said, "La hijrata ba'da al-fath." There is no hijrah, there is no migration to Medina after the conquest of Mecca. So after the conquest of Mecca happens, what year is the conquest of Mecca? What time is Maghrib? It's definitely not 8:40. 7:40? 7:42. You're all liars. You tried. Huh? 8th year of the Hijrah. Good job. Jazakallah khairan. So in the 8th year of the Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ conquers Mecca. When he conquers Mecca, a lot of the other tribes, they kind of jump onto the Islam bandwagon. So there's no point in going to Medina anymore, right? You're safe to be Muslim everywhere. Islam is the dominant force. In fact, becoming Muslim is a positive thing. You could get a position, you could get wealth, you could get favored. So Hijrah doesn't even make sense anymore. The whole point of Hijrah was your faith is in danger. The only place it's safe is with Rasulullah ﷺ, and you need that proximity to learn the faith as it's being revealed actively. None of that is relevant anymore. So he says, everybody stay where you are. Live your life. Meccans are Meccans, Banu Salim are Banu Salim, and so on and so forth. You have your tribes, you have your areas, and we'll still diffuse information and interact, but there's no one coming to Medina anymore, right? That process, Hijrah with a capital H, is done. So he said, there is no Hijrah after the conquest of Mecca. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that those who spent, those who sacrificed, those who migrated, they all get a specific category with Him. Because they're the forerunners in faith, handpicked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the supporters of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the very, very, very beginning phase when all of this mattered. So no one could make that Hijrah. No one could be of these elite couple of hundred companions, men, women, and children, who went from Mecca to Medina. But that doesn't mean that their legacy and their example is off limits. It doesn't mean that this is some kind of abstract tale that we're saying that we have no share of. Because he also said in another hadith, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَالْمُهَاجِرُ مَنْ هَجَرَ مَنْ نَهَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُ. The true migrant, the true person who's doing the Hijrah, who's migrating from one place to another, it's not a physical one. Even though that still has merit. Some people still leave one land for another for the sake of their faith. That still continues. You know, people, they do their own analysis. They say, my faith is not safe here, or it'll be better off elsewhere. And they make a Hijrah with a lowercase h for that reason. Sure. But the Hijrah itself from Mecca to Medina is done. That's number one. Number two is he's saying that physical relocation is not the most important thing. The true person who makes Hijrah, the true person who follows this example, is the one who abandons not their hometown, not a physical structure, is the one who abandons that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made forbidden. You want to make an epic journey, he's saying? You want to go on an epic journey? It's not always about physically relocating, even though that could be a part of it for some people forever. But the greater journey is for you to abandon that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited. Recognizing that this is not me. I want to move away from this. And a lot of times, I'm sure many of you will recognize this. When you want to change your ways, it feels like you're physically going from one place to another. It would feel easier to physically do something than to stop or to change the way you speak or the way that you act sometimes. In fact, sometimes it's easier to move somewhere across the world than to change who you are. It's one of the biggest disappointments that I personally experienced when I went to study overseas, that I was shocked to find that I followed me overseas. I was like, you're still here? Look in the mirror, it's still you. I still have tons of work to do. The environment helps, but it's not a light switch. The true Hijrah that you have to make, that's going to be harder than you picking up and leaving, is for you to abandon the prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The last thing that I want us to reflect on for Maghrib is, what will the stories that the next generation share be? When they share stories with each other about greatness in faith, about perseverance, about courage, about sacrifice, what will be the stories that they share? There's the timeless stories that are the fuel for all of us, the tradition. Umar ibn Khattab and Abu Salama and his family, and Suhaib al-Rumi and Zainab and the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr. May Allah be pleased with them all. But they will say that story itself has a more personal touch for me because it was my father, because it was my mother, because it was my sister, because it was the first Muslim in my family, because it was how faith sparked in this story and continues with you, whoever that you is that you happen to be telling. And there has to be someone that you're telling. If there's no one that you're telling, that's a disaster. If there's no one that you're sharing these lessons with, these principles with, that's a disaster. The baton has to be handed forward. It can't fall. The previous generation is already sticking its hand out like this. And the next generation is already here with its hands out, and you're in the middle. You can't do this. What happens if you do this? Where's the baton go? Falls where? It'll never fall on the ground. That will never happen. If you go like this, the baton doesn't fall on the ground. What happens? Somebody else will take it. You disappear. You are irrelevant. You have nothing to do with the equation. But the baton will never hit the ground. That's a promise from Allah. The previous generation hands it over. The hand could be bloodied and battered and missing fingers. You choose, I don't want my hands to look like that. I'm good. You disappear, irrelevant. Garbage bin of history, and maybe in the hereafter too, God forbid. A new hand appears and says, no, 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 this is serious. This baton has to continue. I'll do it. Get aside. You're useless. You're irrelevant. I'll do it. I'll put the hijab on despite the heat. I'll pray in public despite the ridicule. I'll sacrifice the job. I'll sacrifice the easy way. I will be a trailblazer. I will persevere. I will continue. If you are no longer interested. Bismillah wa salatu wa rasulullah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says إلا تنصروه فقد نصره الله إذ أخرجه الذين كفروا ثاني اثنين إذ هما في الغار إذ يقول لصاحبه لا تحزن إن الله معنا فأنزل الله سكينته عليه وأيده بجنود لم تراها وجعل كلمة الذين كفروا السفلى وكلمة الله هي العليا والله عزيز حكيم. If you do not choose to aid the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah has already aided him. When those who disbelieved had driven him out of Mecca, one of two, when they were in the cave, and he said to his companion, do not grieve, indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. So Allah sent down tranquility upon him and supported him with angels you did not see, and he made the word of those who disbelieved debased, while the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the highest, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is exalted in might and wise. The Hijrah has so many more stories than this, but we choose, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose rather, to commemorate it every year by having it be the advent of our calendar. So do yourself a favor, and indeed, like I said, these 2 months, Muharram and Safar, is when the majority of the companions made the Hijrah. Towards the very end of Safar is when our Prophet ﷺ himself made Hijrah. And that has a bunch of stories, the event with Suraq ibn Malik, the event with Ma'bad. So many occurrences that have fuel for you at all times, but especially in times of the Ummah's weakness. The Hijrah is all about that. So do yourself a huge favor and go back to the chapters about the Hijrah, reread them, think about them, and think which of them will inevitably have to be your story. That which of them resonates the most with you? Which fuel do you need the most? Is it the courage? Is it the perseverance? Is it the sacrifice? Is it a mix of all three of them? See which instances that you run into day in, day out, and use that as fuel. Know that you are the spiritual successor of these ancestors and that you must follow through with the same example. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reunite us with the companions and the Prophet ﷺ in Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to carry on their legacy in difficult times and in times of ease, such that we are the flag bearers and the torch bearers and those that hand the baton on to the next generation. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.